Hi, I'm Troy from Studio 33 Guitar. Thanks for watching. Today we're going to be talking about the top 5 reasons that your guitar chords don't sound good. Now, I've been teaching guitar for a lot of years, and these are the most common things that cause problems for beginner guitar players. If you are just starting out with guitar, you might be getting frustrated with how your chords are sounding, and you might be wondering why you're just not getting it. Now, there's more than just these 5 reasons, but without being face-to-face with you to be able to see what's happening, I can't tell you exactly why your chords aren't sounding right, but these are the 5 most common reasons. And you might be surprised that it's not all to do with the left hand. Some of it has to do with how you're strumming. So we'll take a look at that as well. There'll even be a couple of bonus tips included, so make sure you stay tuned till the end. As always, if you like this video, please click on the like button and subscribe to our channel. That way we know that you like this type of video and we can make more like them in the future. Also, make sure you visit our website, studio33guitar.com. Sign up for our newsletter there and we'll send you a free ebook of beginner chords and scales. We're going to start by talking about our left hand, so let's zoom in on the neck and have a closer look. For our examples, I'm going to be using a C major chord, which looks like this. It's a very common chord that you've probably already learned, but let's look quickly at how to play that first so that you can try out some of these things as we go along. So the C major chord starts with your ring finger on the 3rd fret of the A string. Your middle finger is going to be the next string down, it's back 1 fret. Then you're going to leave this next string open, and then your index finger is going to go on the 1st fret of the B string, and you're going to leave this high E string open. That'll give you the C major chord like that. And that's a good one to use for an example because we have a mixture of fretted notes and open strings. And even though we're talking about the C major chord for this example, these same principles apply for all chords. The first reason that your guitar chords might not be sounding good is that you're not playing with your fingertips. It's really important to get a good curve around to your fingers and try to be playing with the tips of your fingers, not with your fingers flat. Now, this chord is a good example of why, because of these open strings that I talked about. If you play with your fingers more flat, your finger is going to get in the way of those open strings and they're not going to be able to ring out. So right now I'm playing with my fingertips. Now if I turn my hand, kind of flatten, pull my wrist back and kind of flatten out my fingers, you can hear how that sounds a lot different. Because what's happening is the fingers are now laying flat against those open strings. So if I take my picking hand and I just go through 1 string at a time, you can hear how some of those notes are not coming out. And that's a really good test when you're trying guitar chords. Get the chord position that you think is right, and then strum the chord. And it may not sound that bad when you play all the notes together, but a good test is to go through with your pick and play each individual string. And if you get some strings that are making that sound, or something similar, have a look at your fingers and the way that they're positioned and figure out what it is that's causing that string to make that sound. A lot of times it'll be because one of these fingers, or maybe more than one finger, is laying too flat and it's interfering with the next string beside it. For that reason, it's very important to make sure that you get a good curve around to your fingers and good contact with the fingertips on the strings. Now you may have to play around with some of the angles of your arm and your wrist. There's a lot of different angles that can come into play here. Your elbow, your wrist, your knuckles, your fingers. There's a lot of different areas here that can affect how your hand is sitting on the fretboard. So you may need to move your arm around a little bit, move your hand around a little bit to get a good angle to play with those fingertips. Reason number 2 that your guitar chords may not be sounding good is the placement of your fingers in the frets. So when we play a note, we can play this note, this C note, for example, we can play it anywhere in between these two frets. But the best sound is going to be closer to this front fret. So closer to the sound hole. You want to be positioning your finger so that it's as close to that fret as you can get. And that's going to give you the best sound. The reason for that is because when we push down on the string on the neck, we're actually shortening the overall length of the string. So instead of this string being the entire length from the top of the neck all the way back to the bridge, when we push down here, we're actually shortening the length of the string. This part of the string back here is no longer ringing. So this shorter string causes a higher pitch. Now, in order to make that string shorter, we push the string against this metal fret, and that basically cuts off the rest of the string from ringing. What happens if you play too far back is the string is not making good contact with that fret, and you end up getting this buzzing sound. So for example, if I play this string back here, you can hear that buzzing sound that's happening. And that is the string vibrating against that front fret. If we move our finger closer to the fret, you can see how much clearer that sounds. And I'm not pushing any harder. I'm using the same amount of pressure. I'm just simply adjusting where my finger is placed on the fret. So when we have a chord like this C major chord, we want to make sure that each of our fingers are as close to the frets as we can get them. So this one's right there, and this one's right here, and this one. Because the same principle applies for all the strings. Again, if I play back here, that note doesn't sound good, but if I slide my finger up, it suddenly sounds a lot better. Now there will be some chords where it's just not going to be practical for you to play right up next to the fret because some of the other fingers may be in the way. For example, if you're familiar with a traditional A major chord, it has 3 fingers all on the same fret on 3 strings in a row. And so with that chord, that's very difficult to get all 3 of these fingers close to that front fret. But you'll notice that as my fingers are stacked up here, my weakest fingers, which would be the ring finger, is closest to the fret. The middle finger, which would be the next weakest, is the next closest to that fret. And then the index finger, which would be the strongest, is able to be back a little bit further. So because the index finger is a stronger finger, it can get away with not being right up against the fret. But the general rule you want to follow is try and get each finger as close to the fret as you can for most chords. The number 3 reason that your guitar chords might not be sounding good is to do with the amount of pressure that you're putting on your grip. It's probably no surprise that if you don't grip the guitar neck tight enough, your chords are not going to sound good. Your strings are not going to be coming into good contact with the fretboard, and you'll be getting some buzz and some loose strings. But you might be surprised to know that if you grip too tightly, you will also cause some problems. I mentioned how we want to get the finger as close to the fret as we can. And the reason that we're doing that again is because we want the string to make good contact with the fret. We're not trying to get the string to make contact with the wood of the neck. We're trying to get it to make contact with the fret. So sometimes when you play too tightly, you're actually pushing the string down further than it needs to go. And that will actually change the pitch of the string, and it'll make your chord sound out of tune. For example, again, here is this one note with my index finger. Now, if you notice, if I increase my grip, I can change the pitch of that note just by squeezing it tighter. So listen to the difference here. Here it is normally, and there it is pushed in more. You can hear how that pitch changed. So what's happening is I'm pushing that string right against the wood instead of just against the fret. And so then it is pulling that string and making it tighter, and it's changing the pitch. So when you play your guitar chord, you don't want to push with so much pressure that you're pushing the string against the wood and changing the pitch, because that's going to make your chord sound like it's out of tune. Now what you'll find is that finger placement, being close to the fret, actually goes hand in hand with the amount of pressure that you need. Because as I showed earlier, I wasn't changing the pressure that I was putting on the string, and I was able to get a better sound. Sometimes when you have a note that sounds like this, your tendency is to think that you need to squeeze harder. But again, if I just move my finger closer to the fret without changing the amount of pressure, you'll see how much the note sounds better. So when it comes to how you grip the guitar neck and how much pressure you put on, basically you want to put only as much pressure as you need. And you'll find that if you play close to the fret, it's not going to be as much pressure as you might think. Another problem that comes along with too much pressure is sometimes you'll grip so hard that you'll pull the strings down, and that will also change the pitch. So for example, if we take a look at this note where my ring finger is, if I squeeze really hard and I end up pulling the string down, again, it changes the pitch. It's going to make the chord sound out of tune. Reason number 4 is thumb placement. Now, this is a very important but often overlooked aspect of playing guitar. The thumb actually has a very big impact on how the fingers will sit. So earlier I was talking about all the different angles that come into play here, and the thumb placement will affect those angles. So again, if I have a chord like this C major chord and I'm trying to get a good curl around with my fingers, I'm trying to get my fingers close to the frets, my thumb, you can just see the top of it above the neck. I don't want my thumb slipping up here like this, because what happens when the thumb is way up here, you can see how the angle of my wrist here is changing. As I bring my thumb up, my wrist comes up. And when my wrist comes up, my fingers end up laying more flat. You can probably see that as I move my thumb, my fingers are just coming down. So as I bring my thumb down, it doesn't have to be all the way down to the middle of the neck, but just not hanging over the top. Bring it down a bit. My fingers can relax a little bit more. They can get more on the fingertips. Also, as I bring my thumb down, I'm able to stretch my fingers out more. When my thumb comes up, my fingers actually naturally come together. So you can see as I bring my thumb down, I can really open up my hand. As I bring my thumb up, the fingers just come closer together. So when you're trying to get your fingers close to those frets, you need that extra help. And you'll be able to stretch your fingers out more if your thumb is down here more. And again, that'll help you to get more on your fingertips. Now you might see some pictures of your favorite rock and roll guitar player who's got more of a grip like this with his thumb over top. One thing to remember about that is usually that's a grip that's used for playing electric guitar. And sometimes that is necessary. Sometimes with blues guitar, you end up doing a lot of string bending. You need that thumb up there to give you a little extra support to grab the neck to get that string bend. But most of the time, that's not when they're playing guitar chords. When you're bending strings, you're only focusing on that one string. You're not trying to keep your fingers out of the way of other strings. You're not trying to strum 6 different strings at the same time. So when you're playing specifically acoustic guitar and you're trying to get good sounding chords, have a look at where your thumb is and make sure that you bring it down to help open up your hand and to get more of the fingertips on the strings. And reason number 5 that your guitar chords don't sound good may be your strumming hand. Again, this is a very commonly overlooked aspect of playing guitar, and it's something that you really want to pay attention to and focus on. One of the things that I've seen guitar students do a lot is more of a stabbing motion with their strum. So it looks a little bit more like this. And what I usually tell the students is, first off, try to think about your guitar pick like a paintbrush. Try to imagine that you're putting paint on a wall and you're letting that pick flex against the strings, going down and back up again. And let that pick glide across the strings. Don't stab at the strings, let it glide across. And that sounds more like this. Just let that pick flex, let it glide across the strings like a paintbrush. Again, with your grip, you don't need to have a really tight grip on the pick. You want to, again, just have enough of a grip that you're not going to drop the pick. So not too loose and not too tight. Just try to keep it comfortable. And again, just imagine that you're gripping a paintbrush and you're putting paint on a wall. Another common mistake when strumming is beginners will often strum away from the body of the guitar, like this. And unfortunately what happens then is you end up missing the higher strings. So the chord might not sound that bad, but because you're missing these higher strings, it's not as full as it should be. If I make sure that I strum all the strings, you can see how much better and fuller that chord sounds. So what I suggest to my students is when you strum the guitar, make sure that the pick actually comes into contact with the body of the guitar. And that way you're sure to hit all of those strings. And don't be afraid of hitting the guitar. Most guitars have this piece on here that's called a pick guard, and that's exactly what it's for. As you strum and you hit that guard with your pick, you're not going to cause any damage. Now later on, as you get a little bit better in playing, you won't be quite as deliberate with hitting the guitar body. It won't happen quite as often, but you'll get that range of motion, that habit of being able to strum through and get all the strings. Eventually in your playing, it'll just become natural. But for now, as you're learning, make sure that you come into contact with the guitar body. And that will ensure that you're getting all the strings ringing out, and that will make your guitar chord sound better. Well, that's it for this lesson. I hope that you found that useful. Again, if you did, then please let us know by clicking the like button and subscribing to the channel. That way we know and we can make more videos like this in the future. We'll see you next time.